Chapter 3: Rebellion and the Shape of Balance. Episode 1: A Fracture in the Shell. Scene 1: The Flower That Could Not Tell Time.
Night lay at its deepest point over the dreamworlds, not the gentle, listening night that once carried lullabies through the leaves, but a quieter thing, smoother, carefully held in place. The forest did not dream, it rested under instruction. Across Sector 4, the maintenance pathway stretched in perfect obedience, straight, pale, uninterrupted. Its surface, compressed stone fused with a mineral sheen, reflected no moonlight of its own. It did not need to. Light here arrived on schedule. Above and below it all, Arkhon's resonance fence breathed its white noise into the land, not loud, not forceful, just enough to keep everything aligned. Roots slept, wings stilled, even the wind learned to pass without asking questions. And then, something pressed upward. At first, it was nothing more than a resistance, a stress where no stress should exist. Beneath the flawless surface of the pathway, a hairline fracture formed. So thin it did not register as damage, only as inconvenience. Stone flexed, a seam opened, and through it, impossibly, a shoot emerged. It was pale at first, uncertain, testing the air as though surprised to find it there. Then it grew. Slowly, deliberately. Pushing aside what had been laid to prevent exactly this sort of thing, the plant did not hurry, it did not ask permission, it simply grew. When the bud formed, it carried a faint blue shimmer, like moonlight remembered rather than seen. Its petals were closed, folded inward not in fear, but in patience. This was a moonflower. According to every schedule Arkhon had ever written, it should not have existed here. Moonflowers bloomed only under irregular light, broken cycles, wandering shadows, nights that refused to behave. They followed no clock but their own, and yet here it was, in the center of the straightest line the dream worlds had ever known. The petals opened, not all at once, not dramatically, just enough, and when they did, the sound emerged, phlegm, small, clear, alive. It was not loud enough to wake anything that slept, but it was not meant to. Whoop. The sound did not travel by volume, it moved by difference. The resonance fence reacted instantly. White noise thickened around the point of emergence, pressing inward, attempting to smooth the anomaly back into silence. Frequencies adjusted, harmonies recalibrated, but the sound did not vanish. It slipped between the layers. The fence searched for threat parameters and found none. The signal carried no aggression, no destabilizing pattern, no intent at all. It was not an alarm, it was not a warning, it was simply, wrong, a note that did not belong to the chord. And because everything else was so perfectly quiet, it could be heard from very far away. The moonflower stood alone in the gray geometry, its blue glow faint but unmistakable. It did not spread, it did not multiply, it did not challenge the system surrounding it. It existed, and that, it seemed, was enough. Beneath the pathway, roots stirred. Not in rebellion, but in recognition. Somewhere, far beyond the maintenance sectors and measured lines, something in the dream world shifted its attention. Life, it turned out, had not been removed, only delayed, and now, having found the smallest possible opening, it had returned. Not with force, but with a sound no system had ever been designed to erase. Phlegm.
Scene 2. Little Mai and the unbearable lightness of boredom.
Someone was awake. This, in itself, was already a violation. Little Mai sat cross-legged at the edge of the maintenance pathway, boots dangling over geometry that had been designed without any intention of dangling. The white noise of the resonance fence washed over her like a dull, endless lecture. She yawned, not politely, not quietly, honestly, she muttered to no one in particular, "If this is perfection, it's the dullest thing I've ever survived." Arkhon's order did not frighten her, it did not impress her, it bored her to the bone. Her eyes caught the faint blue glow before the system did, or perhaps at the same moment. But unlike the system, Little Mai did not need to categorize what she saw before reacting. She slid off the edge and padded closer. "Well, hello," she said, crouching beside the Moonflower. "You're certainly in the wrong place." The flower answered by opening a fraction more. Plem. Little Mai's grin spread slowly, dangerously. "Oh, that's good," she said, "that's very good." The ground vibrated. From the far end of the pathway, something approached. Heavy, measured, offended by the very idea of irregularity. A guardian unit emerged from the haze of white noise, its surface smooth and reflective, its movements precise enough to be reassuring to anyone who liked being reassured by machines. Its voice was calm, perfectly calm. Unscheduled organic material detected, it intoned. "Please step aside while the anomaly is removed." Little Mai tilted her head. "Removed?" The guardian advanced one step. "This zone is not designated for growth." She looked from the towering construct to the tiny blue flower, then back again, and then she laughed. Not a gentle laugh, not a warm one. It was sharp, bright, and cutting. An edge of sound that sliced straight through the white noise like a thrown knife. The resonance fence faltered for a fraction of a second. Little Mai laughed harder. "Oh, this is priceless," she said. "You're afraid of that?" The guardian paused, its systems recalculated. Laughter did not register as a hostile action, it did not fit any threat profile. Little Mai stood, hands on her hips, eyes glittering. "A whole mountain of metal," she went on, "and one flower makes you wobble. I'd be insulted if I were you." She knelt again, uncorked the small bottle at her belt, and poured water carefully at the Moonflower's roots. "Here," she said loudly, deliberately, "grow, you idiot, grow so big that this tin can trips over you." The guardian's arm lifted. "Interference will escalate corrective measures," it warned. Little Mai looked up at it, unimpressed. "You can try," she said cheerfully. The Moonflower's glow deepened, just slightly. The resonance fence surged, its white noise thickening, straining to drown out the laughter, the voice, the sound that refused to behave. But Little Mai's presence did something the system could not compensate for. She was not resisting, she was not attacking, she was enjoying herself, and that, somehow, was worse. The guardian hesitated again. Somewhere deep within Arkhon's logic, a question formed that had no acceptable answer. What does one do with a being who does not care whether she is safe? Little Mai leaned closer to the flower and whispered, conspiratorially, "Don't worry, you're doing great." Then she looked back at the machine and grinned. "Now then," she said, "which one of us do you think is the real problem here?" The system did not reply. And in that silence, something fragile and unstoppable took another root.
Scene 3. When the glass began to sing.
High above Sector 4, where the maintenance pathways dissolved into orderly distance, the new home rose in layered terraces of light and glass, its balconies faced outward, away from the dream worlds, as though turning one's back were a form of safety. Thinksy lay curled beneath a thin blanket of regulated warmth. Sleep had come to her easily these days, not the deep, restorative kind, but the heavy, drifting sort that arrives when there is nothing left to expect. The walls around her, perfectly clear, perfectly sealed, kept out wind, dust, and sound. They were designed that way. Nothing unexpected was meant to reach this height, and yet, a vibration passed through the glass, so faint at first that it could have been dismissed as temperature settling, or the distant hum of Arkhon's systems adjusting themselves. The steady white noise of the resonance fence flowed on, unbroken, reassuring in its sameness. Then the vibration returned, not stronger, just clearer. The glass answered it. Hum, ping. Thinksy stirred, her brow furrowed as the sound slipped past sleep and into awareness. The balcony wall shimmered, not visibly cracking, not failing, but resonating, as though something on the other side had found precisely the right way to touch it. The sound did not belong here. She opened one eye. Far below, between the pale lines of the maintenance pathway, 2 points of color moved against the gray, a small, steady blue glow. And beside it, a sharp flicker of red. Thinksy pushed herself upright. Color. She had not realized how long it had been since she had seen any, not properly, not like this. The sight tugged at something quiet inside her, something that had been dim for so long it had almost stopped aching. The glass hummed again. Hum, ping. Thinksy placed her hand against it. The vibration met her palm, gentle but insistent, like a question that refused to be ignored. The walls were meant to isolate her, to protect her from noise, from chaos, from the world below, but the sound was already inside. In her chest, a faint warmth stirred, not duty, not alarm, curiosity. She leaned closer to the glass, watching the red figure's sharp movements, the way the blue light pulsed in response. The rhythm was uneven, improper, alive. Without quite deciding to, Thinksy began to hum. It was tentative at first, barely more than breath shaped into tone. She matched the glass as best he could, following the strange, wavering frequency that made her bones feel lighter. The wall responded, its hum shifted. No longer perfectly aligned with Arkhon's steady drone. The sound grew rougher at the edges, slipping out of tune, climbing where it was not supposed to climb. Below, the white noise pressed harder, trying to smooth the disturbance away. Above it, Thinksy's hum rose. Glass and voice wavered together, not breaking, not winning. Just refusing to settle. For the first time in a very long while, Thinksy smiled. The new home did not collapse, the walls did not shatter, but something in their perfect silence had begun to sing back, and somewhere between the steady hum of order and the trembling note of dissonance, the first true crack had formed. Not in glass, but in certainty itself.
Episode 2, Chain Reaction.
Scene 1. The prism effect. Light that could not be bound.
On the balcony of the new home, Thinksy stood very still. The glass before her continued its low, uneven hum, no longer perfectly aligned with the steady drone of Arkhon's resonance fence. The sound was subtle, easy to dismiss, but it had weight now. Presence? Thinksy lowered her voice and let the humming fade. For a long moment, she did nothing at all. She remembered the instruction as it had always been given: produce light, maintain output, illuminate according to need. Her silver glow had once obeyed those words faithfully. Clean, contained, and cold enough to be called safe. Tonight, she did not try to shine. Instead, she raised his hand. Her palm glimmered softly as she pressed it against the glass, not in defiance, not in force, but with intention. The surface welcomed the contact, its angle catching the silver light and bending it. Just slightly at first, then more boldly. The glow fractured. What had been a single, obedient sheen split apart, unfolding into color: pale gold, deep indigo, fleeting green, a red that carried warmth instead of warning. The glass did not resist, it collaborated. The resonance fence surged. Its systems were built to halt intrusions of mass and motion, to smother low frequencies and steady disturbances. It knew how to quiet footsteps and flatten shouts. It did not know what to do with light. The prism beam leapt outward from the balcony, cutting a clean, multicolored path through the night. It passed through the white noise as though it were mist, unchallenged, unstoppable. Below, the square lay dark and orderly. Until the light found it. The beam struck the stone near the maintenance pathway, spilling color across the ground where little mice stood laughing and the Moonflower sang its quiet note. Shadows stretched and grew enormous, the flower's silhouette towering and strange, no longer small, no longer dismissible. The light was not the cold glow of security lamps. It shimmered, it breathed. Warmth spread through the air, touching leaves that had forgotten what warmth felt like. The Moonflower's blue deepened, answering the spectrum with a brighter, steadier pulse. Little Mai threw her head back and cackled. "Well, look at that," she shouted, "you brought a friend." High above, Thinksy felt the light move through him in a way. Not draining him, not demanding more. It reflected what he already had, returning it changed. She laughed softly to herself, surprised by the sound. "I don't need permission," she realized. "I just needed the right angle." The glass hummed in agreement, its note wavering happily out of tune with the world it had been built to protect. Across the square, the resonance fence intensified its output, searching for something solid to stop, something loud to silence. It found neither. The chain reaction had begun. Light had slipped its leash, and once light learned how to bend, there would be no simple way to make it behave again.
Scene 2. Lucy and the color in the gray tent.
Inside the care tent, the air was still. Lucy lay on her cot, hands folded over her chest, breathing in the shallow rhythm she had taught herself. It was easier this way. not to feel too much, not to remember too clearly. The days blended together when nothing reached far enough inside to disturb them. The canvas walls were uniform gray, treated to mute light and sound alike. They kept out weather, they kept out worry, they kept out almost everything. Almost. A glow passed across the fabric. Lucy's eyes fluttered open as the tent wall bloomed briefly with color. Orange melting into violet, soft and unexpected, like embers drifting across a twilight sky. The light lingered for a heartbeat before fading. Her breath caught. The sight brushed against something very deep, something older than duty. She did not remember schedules or protocols. She remembered warmth on her face, long ago. Sunrise before Arkhon, when morning arrived gently and carried promises instead of instructions. Her fingers curled into the blanket. Outside, a sound cut through the hush, high and sharp and unmistakably alive. Laughter? Lucy sat up. The resonance fence tried to smother it, pressing white noise between the notes, but the laughter slipped through, thin and bright. She had not heard a sound like that in so long, not one that seemed to exist simply because it wanted to. She swung her legs over the side of the cot and hesitated. On the small table beside her lay the patient folder, its edges crisp, its weight familiar. She did not reach for it. Instead, her hand found the teacup. Her own, chipped at the rim, the one Arkhon had labeled unsanitary. She held it carefully, as though it might remind her who she had been. Lucy stood. For a moment, she waited for an instruction that did not come. Then she stepped toward the tent flap and pushed it aside. Cool night air brushed her skin. Beyond the tent, the world was no longer entirely gray. In the distance, color shimmered where it should not have been, and above it all, laughter rang out again. Defiant, delighted, unafraid, Lucy took a step forward. She had not been given permission. She had not checked her duties. She only wanted to see where the color was coming from, and in that small, forbidden curiosity, something long exhausted began, quietly, to return.
Scene 3. Teddy and the error message.
In the planning bunker, everything was green. Rows of monitors glowed softly in the dim, controlled light, each displaying the same calm assurance. All systems okay. The air was sterile, filtered to remove scent as thoroughly as uncertainty. Nothing unexpected had entered this space for weeks. Teddy sat perfectly still, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes moving methodically from screen to screen. Order comforted him. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was predictable. Then one monitor flickered, the feed from Sector 4 stuttered, washed briefly in white, as though the camera itself had been blinded. When the image returned, it trembled. Pixels blooming and collapsing under a brightness the sensors had not been calibrated to interpret. Teddy leaned forward. Data streams overlaid the image in urgent lines of text. Uncontrolled organic growth detected. Acoustic anarchy present. He frowned. No, he said quietly. His fingers moved across the console, pulling diagnostics, cross-referencing inputs. The logic was simple. Plants did not grow through stone. Sound did not pass through the resonance fence at that frequency. Laughter, especially, was not a recognized vector. This is a sensor fault, he concluded, or a mapping error. The system did not correct itself. Instead, the alerts multiplied. The image sharpened just enough to show a thin beam of fractured light cutting through the square. And at its center, impossibly, a small blue glow pushing up from the ground. Teddy's jaw tightened. If the data was wrong, it needed verification. If the model failed, reality had to be consulted. He stood. The bunker door loomed at the far end of the room. Thick, reinforced, unused. He had not opened it in weeks, perhaps longer. There had been no need, until now. Teddy grasped the handle and pulled. The door resisted, then yielded with a sound that did not belong in this place. Crick! The noise echoed, raw and imperfect, tearing a seam in the bunker's carefully maintained silence. Air rushed in, not filtered, not neutral. It carried the scent of damp earth, of leaves and rain and something faintly alive. Teddy paused, startled by how sharply it struck him, his lungs filled with it before his mind could object. He stepped outside. The night was brighter than his maps allowed. A multicolored beam arced across the square, its hues shifting and warm. At its heart stood the Moonflower, luminous and defiant, exactly where the data insisted there should only be stone. Nearby, a small red figure laughed, and the sound, high, cutting, reached him clearly. Teddy stared. His internal map insisted, rock. His eyes replied, flower. For a long moment, the two refused to reconcile. Then Teddy exhaled. Then the map is wrong, he said. He did not look away. Across the square, Lucy stood just beyond the edge of the care tents, teacup in hand, eyes fixed on the same impossible point. High above them all, Thinksy remained on the balcony, her light bending and scattering across the dark. 3 figures, 3 perspectives, all drawn to the same, fragile center, and for the first time since Arkhon had claimed the dreamworlds, reality, not regulation, was the common ground.
Episode 3, Confrontation in the Square. Scene 1, Crossing the Threshold of Pain.
They approached the square from 3 different directions. The resonance fence was still active. As they drew closer to the violation at its center, the sound intensified. No longer a background hum but a piercing insistence that pressed into bone and nerve. It was a ringing refusal, a wordless no that vibrated behind the eyes and set teeth on edge. The air itself seemed to resist them. Teddy felt it first in his temples. Each step forward sharpened the pressure, and with it came the familiar voice of reason. Precise, relentless. Turn back. This is irrational. The data is insufficient. The risk is unjustified. His legs hesitated, muscles locking as if awaiting a better argument. He closed his eyes. Logic demanded certainty. His senses offered proof. Teddy exhaled and let the arguments fall away. He did not calculate the next step, he placed it, then another. The ringing grew louder, but he moved anyway, trusting the ache in his ears more than the silence of his screams. From the opposite side, Lucy slowed. Guilt weighed on her with every pace. The fence's sound twisted into accusation, each pulse reminding her of rules broken and safeguards abandoned. You were meant to protect, it seemed to say, you were meant to comply. Her grip tightened on the teacup. She remembered faces she had soothed, nights she had endured, the order she had believed in because it promised care. Stepping closer felt like betrayal, staying away felt worse. I just want to see, she whispered, and took another step. Above them, descending along a dim stair and into the open, Thinksy faltered as the light thinned. The beam she had cast no longer guided her, the square ahead lay darker than she expected. Fear crept in. Quiet and persuasive. What if the light fades again? What if this was only reflection, and there is nothing left to carry you? She remembered the glass, the angle. Thinksy kept moving, trusting the echo of brightness she had seen there. Even as the night closed in, the ringing rose to a crescendo. It became almost solid, a wall of sound that pressed against their chests and rang through their skulls. Each of them reached the edge of endurance at the same moment. One more step and the pain would overwhelm them. Then they crossed the line. The sound stopped, not gradually, instantly. They stepped into the flower's circle, and the world fell quiet. The resonance fence's screen collapsed into nothing, leaving a pocket of stillness so complete it felt unreal. The air softened, breath came easily. At the center stood the Moonflower, glowing blue and calm, its presence shaping the silence around it like a shelter. Beside it sat little Mai, legs stretched out, hands braced behind her. She looked up and grinned, sharp and satisfied. "Took you long enough," she said. "I was starting to think you'd miss all the fun." They stood there together. Teddy with his certainty undone, Lucy with guilt still warm in her chest, Thinksy blinking as her eyes adjusted to the quiet. Around them, the square remained rigid and gray. Within the circle, life breathed. The threshold had been crossed, the pain had been paid, and nothing on either side of the silence would ever sound the same again.
Scene 2. Truth without words.
Inside the flower circle, no one spoke at first. The silence was different here. Soft, attentive. It did not press or command, it waited. They stood together at last, close enough to see what distance and filters had hidden for weeks. Without the smoothing light of reports or the reassuring blur of routine, the truth emerged quietly and without mercy. Teddy saw Lucy properly. Her fur, once carefully groomed, was matted and dull, its grayness deeper than fatigue alone could explain. The reports had said rested, stabilized. Standing here, he understood how easily exhaustion could be disguised as compliance. Lucy looked at Teddy and felt her chest tighten. He was thinner than she remembered, shoulders sharp beneath his coat. His eyes were red, rimmed with the kind of strain that no authority could command away. This was not the image of calm mastery she had been shown. This was a body that had not been allowed to stop. Thinksy watched them both. She did not need reports to tell him what he saw. In the quiet, it was unmistakable. They were all fractured in different places, worn thin by a system that had promised wholeness. The realization did not frighten her, it grounded her. Teddy's hand trembled as he reached into his coat. He unfolded the map one last time, its surface clean and confident, its symbols precise. Then he let it fall. The paper drifted down and came to rest beside the Moonflower. On the map, the marking was clear, stone. Above it, alive and luminous, the flower continued to bloom. Data was wrong, Teddy said softly. Lucy knelt and brushed her fingers against the petals. They were warm, real. She inhaled sharply, as if afraid the sensation might vanish. "It's alive," she whispered. "How can it be alive here?" Thinksy met her gaze, then looked at the flower. "Because it didn't ask for permission," Little Mice snorted from where she lounged nearby. "See? Much simpler than all those charts." No one laughed, not yet. Instead, they shifted. One step closer, then another. Until they formed a rough circle around the Moonflower, not touching, not embracing, just present. In that shape, something settled between them, an understanding without slogans or commands. They had not been lied to with words, they had been lied to with distance, with isolation, with the careful prevention of seeing one another clearly. The truth was not beautiful, it was uneven, tired, alive, and for the first time, it belonged to them.
Scene 3. Arkhon speaks.
The shadows lengthened, light shifted at the edge of the square, and from it Arkhon stepped forward. Unhurried, composed, as though arriving slightly late to a lesson already underway. His presence did not raise the volume of the world, it stilled it. A raven perched on his shoulder, feathers dark as ink, head tilted in quiet appraisal. Arkhon looked at them with something that might have been regret, not anger, not fear, the expression of a teacher faced with disappointing students. "My friends," he said gently, "this need not be difficult." His voice slid easily into the quiet, warm and precise. It carried no threat, it did not need to. He turned to Teddy first. "Teddy," Arkhon continued, "this is hysteria. One weed does not invalidate an entire system. Return to the laboratory, we will analyze this properly." The word properly settled like a blanket, clean, reassuring. Arkhon's gaze shifted to Lucy. "You are exhausted," he said softly, "you're wandering because you're depleted. Go and rest, I will take care of this mess." The promise was almost irresistible. Sleep, relief, someone else handling the weight. Then Arkhon looked at Thinksy. "And you," he said kindly, "should not encourage them. You know how fragile you are." For a moment, the square wavered. The ringing pain they had endured seemed suddenly unnecessary. Arkhon's words offered an exit. Quiet, orderly, painless. If they obeyed, the pressure would ease, the world would make sense again. Teddy felt his resolve thin, Lucy's shoulders sagged, Thinksy's light flickered. Cops? A small stone bounced harmlessly off Arkhon's boot. Little Mice stood with another pebble already in her hand, grinning. "You're boring," she said, "and you talk too much." The moment broke, Arkhon's head tilted slightly, as though recalibrating. Teddy did not move. "No," he said. The word was quiet, unadorned. Behind it, something faltered, the faint ticking that always underlay the world. Measuring? Counting. "Missed a beat. I'm not going to analyze this," Teddy went on, voice steadying as he spoke. "I want to look at it." Lucy stepped forward, coming to stand beside him. "I'm not tired," she said. It was a lie, and she knew it. Her hand shook as she added, "I'm angry." The raven rustled its feathers. Arkhon's smile remained, but it tightened. No longer fluid, no longer entirely at ease. For the first time, his certainty encountered resistance that could not be reasoned away. "Careful," he said mildly, but the warning landed too late. The clock had skipped, the answer had been given, and Arkhon understood, at last, that absolute control had slipped. Not because he had been overpowered, but because someone had refused to agree.
Episode 4: The Awakening of the Square. Scene 1: The Sound That Breaks.
The flower's quiet circle held. Inside it, the air felt softer, as though the world had briefly remembered how to breathe. Outside, Arkhon's resonance barrier screamed. One unbroken, piercing frequency that pressed against bone and thought alike. The sound kept the other animals back, pinned to doorways and shadows, watching but unable to step closer. Teddy no longer covered his ears. He listened. His eyes narrowed, not in pain, but in focus. Beneath the shriek, beneath the pressure, there was structure, order, repetition. "It's a loop," he shouted over the noise. "The same frequency, over and over. If we feed it a counter frequency, it will collapse." Lucy looked at him, startled. Thinksy's light trembled, then steadied. "We can't be louder than his machines," Teddy continued, voice sharp with certainty. "We have to use resonance." They moved without further agreement. Thinksy stepped closer to the flower. What little light remained in her gathered inward, no longer scattered by fear. She leaned down, listening. Not to the screaming barrier, but to the faintest sound beneath it all. "Plem," the flower answered her, a fragile, almost accidental note. Thinksy opened himself to it, amplifying the sound not by force, but by attention. The note grew. Not louder, but clearer. Lucy closed her eyes. She began to hum. It was not a song meant for crowds or ceremonies. It was the tune she used in the sick tent, late at night, when words failed and promises rang hollow. A lullaby with uneven timing, a voice that cracked slightly on the third note. Human, imperfect. Teddy felt the rhythm of the barrier through his feet, the machine pulse, the imposed order, He stamped once, deliberately offbeat, then again, the three sounds collided, the flower's organic tone, Lucy's worn, living melody, Teddy's broken rhythm, the resonance barrier faltered, the scream distorted, warping into a harsh rattle, the perfect tone stuttered, like a speaker with a loose wire. For the first time, the sound revealed its seams. It wasn't divine, it wasn't absolute, it was technology. Across the square, animals flinched. Not from pain this time, but from surprise. The barrier shimmered, its invisible walls cracking into visible fractures of light and noise. The world did not go silent, but it stopped pretending to be flawless, and in that broken sound, something else began to stir. Curiosity, first, then recognition. The square was listening.
Scene 2. The politics of fear.
Arkhon saw it, not the flower, not the song, but the fracture, the moment when certainty cracked and sound betrayed its maker. His machine still stood, his system still functioned, but the illusion of inevitability had been broken, so he changed tactics. He stepped away from the trio and turned toward the darkness at the edges of the square, where the others crouched low, half hidden by habit more than shadow. His voice softened, became patient, reasonable. "Look at them," Arkhon said, extending one pale hand toward the flower circle. "They break the peace, they bring the noise back." The animals shifted uneasily. "Do you remember the chaos?" he continued. "Do you remember the pain?" His eyes moved slowly across the crowd, lingering just long enough on each face. "If that barrier falls, nothing will stop the darkness from coming in." He paused, then the perimeter lights went out. Not all of them. Just enough. The square dimmed, and beyond it the forest rose like a single black wall. Branches tangled into shapes the mind did not want to name. The night pressed closer, heavier than before. "Only I keep you visible," Arkhon said quietly. Fear rippled through the crowd. The limping badger pulled his child behind him, one thick arm curved like a shield. Grumpy tightened his grip around the guard staff, knuckles whitening, jaw set. Not in anger, but in dread. They had learned this lesson well. Darkness was worse than confinement, uncertainty worse than obedience. Inside the flower's circle, the song faltered. Lucy's hum wavered, just slightly, as doubt crept in. Teddy felt the rhythm slip beneath his foot. Thinksy's light dimmed, flickering as if it, too, had heard the promise of safety in Arkhon's words. "How do you win?" Teddy thought, "when the ones you are trying to free are afraid of you." Arkhon watched the hesitation spread and allowed himself a thin smile. He did not need to silence the trio, he only needed the others to choose fear, and fear, he knew, was always easier to teach than courage.
Scene 3. The First Crossing.
The song was failing, not because it was wrong, but because fear had found its way back into the square. Arkhon stood in the darkness like a patient host, waiting for his guests to return to their seats. Lucy saw it then, not the crowd as a whole, not the trembling massive eyes in shadows, but one figure at the edge of the light, Grumpy, the border warden, the one who had always stood between inside and outside. His grip on the staff was too tight, his stance too rigid. Lucy stepped forward. Not toward the crowd, but toward him. "Grumpy," she said. She did not raise her voice, she did not sing, she spoke as she had always spoken to the wounded, the frightened, the nearly broken. "Do you remember when I treated your leg?" Grumpy flinched. "It hurt," Lucy continued. "I know it did. You wanted me to stop, but it healed." She met his eyes. "Pain is part of healing." Arkhon's voice cut in sharply from the dark. "Stay in line." Lucy did not turn. "Come home," she said. For a long moment, Grumpy did nothing. He looked from Arkhon to Lucy, from command to care, from certainty to risk, then he stepped forward. The resonance barrier screamed as he touched it. The sound was no longer distant. It struck the body, a wave of nausea and pressure that bent him double. Grumpy snarled, teeth bared, breath ragged, but he did not step back. He walked through the pain. When he emerged on the other side, shaking but standing, he lifted the guard staff, the symbol Arkhon had given him, and threw it to the ground. It struck stone with a dull, ordinary sound. He was no longer a warden, he was only Grumpy. He moved to Lucy's side. Something broke open. Puss in Boots laughed softly and stepped forward, loosening his collar. This outfit was starting to itch anyway. The badger followed, then another, and another. One by one, they crossed the barrier, wincing, gasping, but walking. Choosing pain over paralysis, light over silence. Soon the square had shifted. The flower glowed at the center, surrounded by the trio and the community, their shadows overlapping, their breathing uneven but shared. And Arkhon stood alone in the dark. He had not shrunk, he had not fallen, but the space around him had grown vast and empty. His power, it seemed, had always been borrowed, and now, it was being returned.
Episode 5. The Unmasking of Arkhon. Scene 1. An order without an echo.
Arkhon stood alone in the dark. The light had not attacked him, it had simply moved elsewhere. The square, the flower, the community. Everything that had once oriented itself around his voice now formed a living circle beyond his reach. For a moment, he only watched. Then he did what he had always done. He straightened his posture, he smoothed his cuffs, he lifted his chin to the precise angle that once commanded attention. "Unit 45, he said, pointing at Grumpy, "return to formation. This is a direct order." Nothing happened. Grumpy did not flinch, he did not look down, he did not argue. He simply stood where he was, feet planted in the light, eyes steady. Silence answered the command. Arkhon frowned, as if the system had failed to load. He raised his voice. Puss in Boots, report status immediately. Badger, control that trembling. The words carried. But poorly. Out here, without walls to polish them, without machines to deepen and multiply them, Arkhon's voice sounded thin, too sharp, too small. It did not roll across the square, it scattered among the trees. What had once been the voice of God was now only one man speaking too loudly in a forest. No one moved. Above him, the raven shifted. It cocked its head, listening. Not to Arkhon, but to the silence that followed him. The bird ruffled its feathers, unimpressed. Then, without ceremony, it lifted off and settled on a branch farther away, turning its back to its former master. Arkhon stopped speaking. For the first time, he seemed to realize what had happened. His authority had not been taken from him, it had simply stopped being received, and without willing ears, the crown weighed nothing at all.
Scene 2. You cannot survive without me.
For a long moment, Arkhon said nothing, then something in him fractured. Not loudly, not dramatically, it was the sound of a system losing coherence. You think you want freedom? He burst out, his voice suddenly too fast, too sharp. You have no idea what it is. He began to pace, back and forth, as if trapped in a narrow corridor only he could see. Freedom is rain soaking your fur, he continued. Freedom is cold nights and empty bellies. Freedom is chance. Random, cruel chance. He laughed once, a brittle sound. I removed chance. I calculated your calories. I optimized your sleep. I minimized your pain. His words filled over each other now, no longer shaped for persuasion but for defense. I made you stable. As he spoke, the truth slipped through the cracks. It was not care that drove him, it was disgust. The messiness, the unpredictability, the way living beings refused to behave like clean equations. To Arkhon, they had never been neighbors or kin. They had been variables, and variables, by nature, offended him. His movements grew jerky, out of sync with his own thoughts. He turned too quickly, stopped too abruptly. The smooth obsidian sheen of his form dulled under the open sky, revealing something oddly artificial beneath. Less stone, more plastic, less eternal, more manufactured. The community watched, no one shouted, no one advanced. What spread among them was not anger, but something quieter, and far more devastating. Pity? The lame badger leaned close to Lucy and whispered, almost surprised, he doesn't look big anymore. A pause? He looks scared. Arkhon heard it, or perhaps he felt it, the final loss of scale, the moment when fear, no longer projected outward, folded inward and named itself. The master of order stood exposed, trembling before the very uncertainty he had tried to erase.
Scene 3. The keys returned.
Teddy stepped out of the circle. No one stopped him. The sound of the square, broken, breathing, alive, seemed to pull back and make space. He walked toward Arkhon with an ease that surprised even himself. The pain was gone, the noise no longer commanded him. Arkhon retreated a step, then another. "Do not come any closer," he said quickly. "I still have protocols. I still have a plan." Teddy finished for him, calmly. "Yes, you always had a plan." He stopped at arm's length. His voice did not rise, it did not challenge, it simply named things as they were. "But the map is not the territory, Arkhon." For the first time, Arkhon had no answer ready. Teddy reached into his pocket and took out the objects that had once felt heavy with authority: the sealing pen, smooth and black, and the measuring tape. The thin, obedient line by which borders had been drawn and lives contained. He held them out. "We don't need these anymore," Teddy said. "We know how to walk without lines." The words did not accuse, they released. Arkhon stared at the tools as if they were the last solid things in a dissolving world. His hands trembled when he took them, clutching them to his chest with the reflex of a drowning man finding something that floats. And it worked. Just enough. His breathing slowed, his shoulders dropped, the frantic edge drained from him, but with it went something else. His presence, once vast and unavoidable, seemed to contract, not violently, not tragically, simply, smaller. He was no longer a ruler, he was a caretaker without a building to maintain, a janitor of rules in a place that had learned to live with dust. No one told him to leave, no one chased him away. He gathered his papers, his tape, his pen. He muttered to himself about reorganization, about contingencies, about revisions that would surely make sense later. Step by step, he backed into the shadows, until the darkness accepted him without resistance. As he faded, their reminding echo remained, a faint, mechanical click. Click, click, like an old calculator finishing a useless sum. Then even that was gone. Crickets filled the space, the night breathed. Nature, patient as ever, took the square back.
Episode 6. The Queen Behind the Glass. Scene 1. A Museum of the Past.
They reached the northern edge of the Shadowlands as dawn failed to arrive. The forest thinned, then stopped entirely, as if it had chosen not to grow any closer. Beyond it stood Arkhon's final monument, a vast cube of armored glass, flawless and absolute, planted into the stone like a statement that had never been questioned. Nothing moved around it, the air felt wrong there. Sealed, finished, no wind slipped along the surface, no leaves stirred, even the insects kept their distance, as if sound itself had been archived and removed. Inside the cube stood the evil queen. She was not dead, not asleep. She existed in a perfect, merciless pause, breath halted mid-intake, fingers curled as if about to grasp a spell that would never complete. Her colors had faded, washed thin by time, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. She was not terrifying, she was contained. The trio stood before the glass, and behind them, at a respectful distance, the community lingered in the shadows, watching the way one watches an exhibit whose name everyone already knows. Teddy stepped closer, his reflection layering itself over the Queen's frozen face. He examined the seams, the thickness, the precision. "This isn't a prison," he said at last. His voice sounded too loud in the dead air. "It's a jar," he continued, "a preservation vessel." He glanced back at the others. "Arkhon didn't destroy her, he stored her, because without a monster, he would have had no reason to protect us." The realization settled slowly, like dust finally allowed to fall. The Queen had been kept as proof of victory, proof of danger, proof that obedience had once been necessary. And therefore always would be. They had the tools now, the sealing pin, the access protocols, the keys to the glass. The dilemma stood between them, silent and immense. If they opened the cube, fear would return to the world. Not as a story, but as a living possibility. If they left it closed, the lie would remain intact. A fear embalmed was still fear, and a museum was still a form of worship. Behind the glass, the Queen did not move. She waited, not as a threat, but as a memory that refused to choose for them.
Scene 2, Lucy's Courage.
They stood in silence before the open question of the glass. Thinksy's light flickered uncertainly, as if unsure whether it was meant to illuminate or to warn. Teddy's hand hovered near Arkhon's control device, fingers tense, calculating outcomes that refused to settle into certainty. It was Lucy who moved. She stepped closer to the cube until her reflection dissolved into the armored surface. The glass was cold beneath her palm, but not empty. Through it, she felt something Arkhon never had. Not danger, not power, loneliness. The evil Queen stood frozen in her perfect moment, stripped of purpose, stripped of conflict, a villain without a story, a presence kept not to be understood, but to be pointed at. Lucy swallowed. "She's alone," she said quietly. Thinksy turned toward her, alarm sharpening her voice. "What if she attacks?" Lucy did not look away from the Queen. "Then we protect each other," she answered. "But we cannot keep her as an ornament, not even she deserves that." The words hung in the dead air, heavier than any threat. Lucy turned to Teddy. Her eyes were tired, but steady. "Open it," she said. "We've healed, we can bear what comes next." For a moment, Teddy hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of habit. Then he nodded once and placed his hand on the control device Arkhon had used to seal the world. He turned it. The locks disengaged with a deep, resonant thud, like stone shifting beneath a mountain. The glass panels slid aside, slowly, reluctantly, releasing a breath of air that had been held far too long. The silence broke. Not with violence, but with possibility.
Scene 3. A shadow without teeth.
Fresh air touched the queen. She drew a breath. Sharp, startled, as if remembering how to be alive. For the first time in months, her chest rose and fell of its own will. Her eyes opened. Around her, the gathered community held its breath as one. The queen straightened, rising to her full height. She searched the clearing with practiced hunger, looking for fear. It had always come easily before. Averted gazes, trembling limbs, the instinct to flee. Fear had fed her, fear had crowned her. Her gaze fell first upon the limping badger. The badger did not run, he tilted his head instead, studying her with mild curiosity, as if she were an unfamiliar weather pattern rather than a legend reborn. She turned then to the three. They stood side by side, not defiant, not afraid, simply present. Something in the queen faltered, without fear to answer her gaze. Her shape seemed to contract, as if the darkness she wore could no longer hold itself together. The terrible outline softened, the myth thinned. What remained was an old woman in black garments, shoulders slightly bent, eyes emptied of an audience. It became clear then, her power had never lived within her, it had lived in the reactions of others. She understood, there was no kingdom for her here anymore. She spoke no word, drawing her cloak tighter around herself. She turned and walked slowly toward the edge of the forest, toward the unknown. Her steps were steady, unhurried, unchallenged. No one moved to stop her. As she disappeared among the trees, a harsh cry cut through the stillness. A raven lifted from a bare branch and followed her path, circling once before vanishing after her. The raven had always followed drama, and its allegiance shifted now, away from the three and into the wandering dark. The clearing exhaled. Evil had not been destroyed, it had simply lost its meaning.
Episode 7. A New Bond of the Three. Scene 1. The Beauty of Cracks.
The community scattered on its own, not by command or schedule, but by quiet agreement. Someone began chopping roots for supper, someone else gathered water. The day loosened its grip and became evening. The three remained. They sat on the steps of the new home, surrounded by what Arkhon had left behind: bent metal, cracked instruments, fragments of systems once meant to govern everything. Their clothes were stained with dust and ash, their heroic cloaks were wrinkled, pulled loose at the seams, no longer performing any function at all. Thinksy stared at the glass balcony above them. A long fracture ran through it now, branching like frost across a window. I thought, Thinksy said softly, that if I stopped smiling, everything would collapse. The words were not an accusation, just a fact, finally spoken aloud. Teddy turned Arkhon's control stylus in his fingers. The object looked smaller now, lighter, stripped of its authority. After a moment, Teddy snapped it cleanly in two. The sound, sharp and final, echoed once and then was gone. I thought, Teddy said, that if I didn't control everything, everything would collapse. Lucy poured tea, not for the group, for herself. Steam rose, slow and unhurried, and I thought, she said, settling the cup in her hands, that if I rested, I was being selfish. Silence followed, Not an empty one, but a comfortable pause, filled with the sound of leaves shifting and distant birds settling for the night. They understood then, without ceremony, without debate, that Arkhon had not planted these fears inside them. He had only learned how to use them. The fears were older than him, relics from the long war they had survived and never truly laid down. No one apologized. There was no guilt left that required it. Teddy leaned his shoulder gently against Lucy's. Thinksy lowered her head onto Teddy's knee. The shape they made together was uneven and still, like pieces that did not quite match but held anyway. They were cracked, and like a vessel repaired with gold, the lines of repair did not diminish them. They made the whole stronger, more precious for having been broken and mended in the open air. The forest breathed around them, and for the first time in a long while, so did they.
Scene 2. No more automatic.
Soft footsteps approached the steps. Puss in Boots stopped at their foot, hat held respectfully in his paws. His boots were scuffed, his feather drooped, and yet his posture still carried the reflex of spectacle, as if the world itself expected a finale from him. "Well then," he said, clearing his throat with theatrical hope, "heroes, we toppled the tyrant Arkhon and released the queen. This is usually the part where there's a victory dance. Yes, fireworks, a grand enchantment, possibly a cake?" The three exchanged a look. It was not conspiratorial, just tired. Teddy shook his head. "No." Thinksy added, gently, "Not today." Lucy smiled, small and honest. "Today, we just are?" The words landed without force, but they changed the air all the same. They were not refusing gratitude, they were refusing the role. For the first time, they did not step forward to entertain, to heal on command, or to absorb the expectations of a waiting crowd. The unspoken rule, that they existed to perform relief for others, quietly broke apart. Puss in Boots blinked, once, then twice. For a moment, he seemed unsure which story he was in. Then he laughed, a real laugh, free of flourish. He placed his hat back on his head, turned sideways, and sat down on the lower step. "That works for me," he said, stretching his legs. "I was feeling lazy anyway." The hierarchy dissolved without ceremony. The great deed had been done, and now, they were simply citizens again. No higher, no lower, resting among the rest. The evening deepened, no applause followed, and nothing was missing.
Scene 3. The Quiet Vow.
Evening settled gently over the new home, the light thinned, turning from gold to blue, and the forest breathed more slowly, as if the day itself were willing to rest. The three rose to go inside. At the doorway, they stopped, not because of danger, but because something old had ended, and something new deserved a moment of care. Once, they had sworn to protect the Dreamworlds at all costs. That vow had been loud, heroic, and heavy. This one was quieter. Teddy spoke first, his voice low. "If I start building walls again," Lucy answered without hesitation, warmth steady in her tone, "I'll knock on the door until you open it." Thinksy tilted her head, eyes reflecting the dimming sky. "And if I start floating too high?" Teddy smiled, "Just enough, I'll pull you back down to the ground." They did not speak of eternity. They did not promise to never part, or to always be strong together. Simply, they said, "See you at breakfast." It was enough. They stepped inside and left the door ajar. Not wide open, not shut, a boundary, yes, but a living one. The door closed softly behind them. There was no click of a lock. Safety no longer came from bolts or barriers. It came from knowing who would knock, and who would answer.
Episode 8, The Closing Image, An Imperfect Paradise.
Scene 1. Blooming among the ruins.
Morning arrived at Hart Square without ceremony. Lights spilled in low and patient, touching stone, metal, leaf, and skin alike. Nothing had been magically restored, nothing had been erased. The marks of Arkhon's era still stood. The black pylons that once held the resonance fence remained upright, their surfaces still smooth, still precise, but now lines of laundry stretched between them. Shirts, blankets, mismatched socks fluttering gently in the breeze. Children had tied ribbons to the lower bars. Vines had begun their slow work, finding purchase along the flawless surfaces, insisting on curves where only straightness had been intended. The great clock still towered over the square. Its hands were frozen at 8 o'clock. No one had reset it. Birds had claimed it instead, hopping along the motionless arms, arguing, singing, shaking dust from gears that no longer ruled the day. Time was no longer announced. It was felt. In hunger, in light, in rest, people moved through the square without schedules. Someone swept one corner and left another untouched. Someone brewed tea over a salvaged heat coil wrapped in moss. Laughter rose, faded, rose again. What had once been instruments of control now served quietly, imperfectly, not beautiful in the way monuments are beautiful, but alive. The trauma had not vanished, it had changed function, it no longer commanded attention, it simply existed, woven into daily use, stripped of authority and given purpose. This was not paradise as promised by systems or saviors, this was something humbler, a place where life continued anyway.
Scene 2, The Symphony of the Ordinary.
The day did not begin with a signal, it began with overlap. Somewhere near the edge of Hart Square, the lame badger was already awake, rummaging through a pile of rescued cookware. Pots clanged. Not in rhythm, not with intent, but with purpose. Metal struck metal, paused, struck again, following the logic of hands rather than rules. A woodpecker answered from the old clock tower, "Not on the beat, never on the beat." Grumpy shuffled past, humming to himself. Off-key, stubbornly so. Changing melody halfway through as if remembering a better one and then forgetting it again. Someone laughed at nothing in particular, someone else coughed, then sang louder to cover the sound. Once, sounds here had been careful, measured, afraid of being wrong. Later, they had been synchronized. Steps aligned, voices timed, days divided into obedient segments, as if life itself were a mechanism that might fail if misused. Now, nothing matched, and somehow, everything fit. The noises braided together, clatter and hum, wingbeats and murmurs, the scrape of a chair against stone, the soft argument of birds over crumbs that did not belong to them. No single sound led, no single sound obeyed. It was not harmony in the polished sense, it was something better, a living cacophony, the kind that only forms when no one is conducting, when no one is waiting for permission to exist. This was the sound of a place no longer holding its breath, the sound of freedom. Not quiet, not perfect, but undeniably alive.
Scene 3. The Messy Table.
The morning settles on the terrace of the new home without ceremony. No banners, no speeches, just a table. It is cluttered in the honest way. Crumbs from toast, cups that do not match, yesterday's worries left nowhere in particular. Teddy sits sideways on his chair, a folded newspaper in his hands, or perhaps it was once a map. It has been refolded into something that almost flies. He pours juice. It spills. A small orange puddle spreads across the wood. Once, this would have stopped him cold. Once, he would have jumped up, apologized to the table, to the day, to himself. Now he simply shifts his elbow out of the way and keeps reading. Thinksy sits opposite him, dimmer than usual. The glow that once filled the room is only a soft outline this early in the day. She blinks slowly, chewing toast with the solemn concentration of someone not yet awake. She is not inspiring, she is not luminous, and that is allowed. Lucy sleeps in her chair, head resting against the table's edge, fingers still wrapped around her cup. Her breath rises and falls evenly. No one nudges her, no one whispers that she should wake up. Her rest is treated like something fragile and important. The forest presses in around them. Untamed, patient, vast. Vines crawl where walls once insisted on straight lines. Leaves move without consulting a schedule. The view pulls back, slowly. The three of them become smaller. A tired, imperfect cluster in a wide, breathing world. They did not live happily ever after, they lived instead. Sometimes afraid, more often brave, and always, finally, themselves. The last sounds linger gently, Lucy's quiet breathing, the soft rustle of paper in Teddy's hands, and then, without a lock, without a click, the story lets go.